There is a spike in pro-Israel talking heads about a new 9/11, in unison with Zionist hedge funds pushing out the middle class for walled compounds of IDF war criminals in suburbia, turning once quiet neighborhoods for softball games into fortresses for stockbrokers and techies who front for intelligence. As if there is a planned false flag with thousands, even millions of military-age Israelis lurking around unemployed and intentionally stressing already suffering housing markets. Supercars of the progeny of ghoulish technocrats pick us off with quit-claim deeds and shady land deals linked to offshore crime groups. Seems like an effort that is in tandem with Trojan horses in our government, owning monopoly media pushing Zionist pro-war talking points, war profiteering and abuse of the middle class and working poor. We must become hyper-vigilant to the mega-group investments outlined in the works of Whitney Webb. Whispers of powerful interests, vast sums of money, clandestine agendas, infiltrating our tech sector to work as spies and censors. Should we prepare for more false flags by oligarch criminal groups that treat American taxpayers like we should sponsor their nepotist cabal? There is no way to mistake the intentional push to destroy blue-collar homeownership in not just California tech sector and Manhattan, but also Seattle and Texas are being inflated to create an artificial ruling class in corporate feudalism. Watch Zionist shills pushing fear-mongering about terrorist events because they are always those in position to profit. And in any murder investigation in a non-rigged system, they would be the prime suspects. We the people remember that the tree of liberty must be fed with the blood tyrants. It's not just the frontmen you need to watch for. The producer and financier class behind many major brands is far more bloodthirsty. Wall Street, banks, and hedge funds tied to Zionism making middle-class homeownership impossible. But suddenly, all these IDF war criminals come here and move into mansions with no income or obvious job besides waiting around for a false flag or turning family neighborhoods into walled compounds. As we look at films like Muriel 2009, Farha, The Lobby USA, the work of Abby Martin and Max Blumenthal, a great divide surfaces between Jewish truthers and the vile perpetrators of endless Israel wars. Even Jews are not safe from censorship, torture, and murder by the Zionist insect and Christo-fascist war lobbyists. We can see the history of the Middle East in film, in architecture, and literature. Once Orientalism pushed the mysteries of the East, a magical land of Gilded Age stories of adventure, 1920s Mediterranean-style villas. Once the war profiteers got the Balfour Declaration, 2 world wars with shadowy financing, this presentation changed by World War II. Suddenly, the people near oil were not fabled guides and storytellers. Now they are seen as percentages of shareholder profits for defense contractors, hedge funds, and spy agencies. But ferocious threats to the noble Europeans come to conquer sand people with no rights, wisdom, or heritage. We must reject the propagandist narratives of the domestic Israel lobby in Hollywood and the new faces arriving to paint the world in terms of IDF bloodlust. If you follow writers like Edward Said, Ilan Pappy, Norman Finkelstein, Miko Peld, and William Blum, you can see how Hollywood is just conforming to shifts in narrative by Wall Street and Jewish organized crime behind cultural engineering. There is a clandestine joint effort between groups like the Keck, John Birch Society, Heritage Foundation, IPAC, CIFER, and pro-Israel think tanks to globalize the lynch mob pack mentality we saw here in America in attacks on Black and Latino centers of wealth, learning, and culture. This does not mean to say that working-class Anglo-Americans are not on the menu for Wall Street predators. This is highlighting the divisionary tactics that pit us against each other with two-party system, sports, wealth divides, and cultural destabilization. We must recognize that the ruling class is not Jews, the British or American oil mafia by itself, but a sounding board for all of these interests that feed on the people under a lobbyist infrastructure that was not the original American government from 1776. Between 1812 and 1913, our throats were slit by offshore ruling class, destabilizing United States. This parasitic idea of proxy war quickly led to our abuse of Central America, Asia, and Pacific. Our original American patriots turned a blind eye to slavery. The same mentality is at work behind the rise of IRS and foreign aid. False flags are covert action designed to look like someone else did it. But more often, crises are real, and bad actors rush to frame the narrative. Examples of false flags are the Spanish-American War started over the U.S. Maine, the Gulf of Tonkin, and the non-Arabs arrested on 9/11. We must furthermore examine the crimes of slavery, bank and Wall Street-led real estate bubbles, insider trading, war profiteering, and genocidal oil wars that lead to massive missing trillions from Pentagon and cutouts for intelligence. If the regime and its Epstein-class donors are going to attack us where we sleep with bankster crimes, billions in Trump-linked gangsters' fraud absolved while drowning the middle class, we must think about how the tar-boiling founding fathers dealt with henchmen of finance, war profiteers, and those who sleep with enemy agents. Political manipulation is bound to the economic realities of daily life. We know about World War II, but the parts about who funded Hitler and why are written out of history or glossed over as the Epstein team linked Maxwell family runs a global textbook empire. Why did lifelong Zionists fund the Nazis? The shadowy finance of Hitler was not intended to help Germany. Lifelong Zionists, Rothschild bankers, and British crown-linked secret societies also worked to destroy USA with Federal Reserve. It was a long road to establish Israel, hundreds of years of forgotten wars to prop up the British, destroy the French, Russians, and Germans, topple America with dirty wars, play both sides in Christianity and Islam, Catholic and Protestant wars. Same with Ottomans who massacred Armenians. Many were Sabatian Frankist Jewish mafia. Same with Borgia. Regime. Was foretold in the work of Zionist Theodor Herzl. Not with magic, but because the commie groups had no special love for any other Jews who refused to leave to Palestine. Similar shadowy crimes are the implosion of manufacturing, foreign trade deals, destabilization of Latin America, and pushes to flood the USA with cheap labor. When homes are unaffordable, people are pushed farther from jobs and support as the living wage is bled with inflated markets. Housing instability erodes health and community ties. Oftentimes, sites of large manufacturing centers are gutted, left to squalor and destitution as jobs move overseas with Chinese steel, Mexican labor, Indian call centers, or Israeli data farms. How can we forge a new path relying on fraud businessmen, New York City hucksters, shady politicians who pop up out of nowhere, long since enslaved to billionaires and predatory hedge funds? The crimes against the middle class are many, like speculative investment, housing bubbles, multinational corporations rigging local markets, and skewed zoning that aids Wall Street sharks to seize homes in what would have once been called communist tactics. Socialized losses for the rich, extreme austerity for the poor. Welfare and Section 8 are nothing compared to bank bailouts, security contracts, oil subsidies. The erosion of workers' rights hollows out stability. While local families to California middle-class valleys are forced to live in cars, shelters, and group homes, we see massive amounts of Indian and Israeli businesses starting up with nebulous loans. Stagnant wages, lost benefits, and insecure gigs breed disenfranchisement. These pressures often stem from deliberate policy choices, tax advantages, deregulation, anti-labor laws. There is never any question about the funding of the police state, dirty wars, security contracts, or destabilization programs. Is the only future for the youth of today to be a slimy techie, cannon fodder in more oil and Israel wars? The alternative is holding several jobs while some Wall Street-backed Israeli is buying up multiple investment properties for sex abuse, spy rings, and organ harvest trafficking dungeons as seen in the Howard Rubin case? Wealth translates into political power. Fund campaigns, lobby laws, purchase outlets, shape opinion. Concentrated media sets agendas and frames debates. There is a reason Mexico and Latin America is kept poor, same with pre-revolution Cuba, Southeast Asia, and much of Middle East, to serve the cannibalistic predation of Wall Street, London dirty money, and global sex tourism. Parasitic incel investors prey in Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, Dominican Republic, and Africa for vulnerable victims. That abuse does not stop at sex trafficking but also organ harvest, snuff films, and for slaves in the secret space program. We must break these networks of corporate power, of ruling class predation, of tech Stasi working as spies during the day and rapists during the night with remote jobs that send our worst vultures to Bali, Indonesia, and Singapore to scour the ghettos for women and children to conceal in shipping containers. When dealing with the day jobs of these tech vultures, we see bot farms, propaganda sweatshops, and anti-Semitism networks who aid in the cover-up of crimes of Israeli settlers and affiliated dirty money networks pushing pro-war talking points. Coordinated accounts can fabricate consensus and speed falsehoods. Disinformation floods the world with monopolies, trust funds, fake CIA charities, and fake synagogues hosting spy rings until trust erodes. As we fall further into compromised politics, two-party systems silencing third parties, using redistricting and dirty money to force out anyone who still has a soul, systems of manipulation are not infallible. These networks can be tracked and held accountable. Weaknesses can be understood, exposed, and challenged. The spies working to turn our police and federal agencies into mass murderers are vulnerable as many are American in name only, serving an ancient and vast enemy conspiracy of warhawk Talmudic pedophiles. Confronting these challenges begins with studying the tactics war profiteers use. CIA, Mossad, NSA MI6, Shin Bet, and DARPA projects all inform the victims on the rules of engagement when theorizing revolution. We must adopt the tactics, scope, and focus of these predatory shills who feed on the corpse of the working class. As hedge funds and banks buy up our neighborhoods and demolish our dreams, we must investigate who owns new developments. What ties to Murder Inc. and Epstein team bankers have laid claim to our middle-class dream? Only hype focus, group efforts, and turning off the television can unite the working poor and middle class against the mind control wasp that has used the American government and media as its toilet for over a century. As the militarization of police and federal agencies arise, we must look to our own neighbors, street gangs, community groups, and even former organized crime to create revolutionary youth movements that honor the mentality of the 1960s love and anti-war movements, but also adapt to veterans and insiders willing to expose the bad actors among us in the community. As it becomes more and more likely Zeo-Snoidbots of the big media mind control insect are willing to begin shooting down our people, we must ask that those uniform will not follow unlawful orders to shoot our people down. As we struggle to live among the ruins of our society, we must navigate the future wars called for by the Israel lobby and Wall Street that can only end in police state apocalypse at home, an unpopular draft, mass evictions, and local cops just doing their jobs opening fire on out-of-work people being kidnapped for frontline like Ukraine. As the threat of criminal politicians, unpopular billionaires, and failing corporate greed leads to late-state capitalism collapse, we must be red for the rich to literally use the banks and police to eat the poor. Using lawfare to seize cars, force out families, and create false flags to gun us down. With more and more suspicious assassinations, we must think back to our heroes of peace and justice cut down in reported suicides or drug overdoses, shot down in staged crime scenes and framed to be lost as political prisoners more than half a century. We must focus on unity and solidarity between the extreme left and right. I do not mean neoliberals and neocons or just the Greens and libertarians. I'm talking about the radicals, the reactionaries, the partisans of a new age who must set aside old beefs to recognize the peril all Americans are in from an unfeeling government owned by stateless megacorporations that create hysteria, division, false flags, and rigged elections. We can all agree we do not want to see America fall into fighting and ruin, but we cannot allow the Skynet drone war, secret police, and mass-killing event schemes of the Techies to become the end of constitutional freedoms. The Snowden leaks, Julian Assange, Epstein revelations, and independent reporting of journalists outside the mind control networks show us we are very close to complete police state, while the brainwashing on TV gets you to think you are winning to see censorship or lawfare against either political target is currently in the news instead of focusing on the crimes of big oil, Wall Street, and Tel Aviv. Support protections for whistleblowers. Watch for big corporate buyouts of homes. Don't sell to hedge funds or foreign investment corporations. We must remember the chief focus of Wall Street has always been pitting the disenfranchised against the small business, the rural against urban, poor against middle class. Act with unwavering focus. Do not take the bait of provocation against each other when the true enemies are specific people for specific crimes against the Constitution and economy. We must be ready to confront the lobbyists and financial henchmen. Protest, boycott, petition, and litigate is always the first choice, but in a world of militarized private armies and local cops willing to advance the goals of bankers, We must be willing to fight for our farmers, our small business, our persecuted and silenced. When thousands of accounts were banned for standing for Palestine, no one cared. But the same interests of Walmart, Amazon, Palantir, Google, and Apple are coming to replace your neighbors, to bulldoze your community garden and murder your favorite writer in the middle of the street. The antidote to fear is deliberate action taken together. Invest in local produce, in tearing our lawns for food forests, for putting the homeless to work. Protect journalism, housing security, and fair labor. Not everybody can be Bernie, and Bernie is not good on all things. Libertarian free markets can lead to poison in the water and air we breathe, but we can find common ground among radical polarities. Focus on systems and behaviors that cause harm, not entire groups. We need to single out a list of the worst offenders of war for profit: false flags, oil invasion, hiding illegal domestic surveillance behind anti-Semitism calls to limit free speech by the same demons who spray paint swastikas on their own buildings. Meet disinformation with patient insistence on truth. Nowhere is more pressing than the areas around big tech pushing out the blue collar, of small farms crushed under the dual threat of government and foreign markets. We need to never fall for the trap of export when we should be growing what feeds our own community. The future is built by what we choose to do now, together. Create orchards, test tap water for poison, look into deregulation and fracking in our aquifers, of groups like Dick Cheney's Genie Energy directly linked to ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Hamas proxies. Realize that some of the far left and far right platforms should be adopted. I don't mean trans school time. I mean an armed population serious about protecting workers' rights and limiting the crimes of decades of letting billionaires decide. Let us be vigilant, engaged, unafraid, and do the steady work that keeps a republic. The time for peace or massive death could be equally near, but ever has backing down to the whims of predatory government and media monopolies been so close to World War III as the world our children are growing into? An age to die for oil and predatory technology.